City Council Public Safety Committee, and we'll start the meeting by calling the roll.
Councilmember Hampton.
God is good on the line. Blessed to be here.
Councilmember Kennedy.
Here.
Councilmember Madison.
Here.
And Chair Gordo.
Here.
We have a quorum.
So I'd like to start by addressing a matter on our agenda that has been pulled, and this is item under new business, item 1, the authorization to enter into an agreement with the Pasadena Unified School District for school prevention offices services to fulfill PUSD'S Project Prevent Grant. Mr. City Manager, did you want to address that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We were bringing this item forward, which was requesting authorization for the city to enter into an MOU for the Pasadena Police Department to provide a portion of the services associated with an $11 million grant that was received by PUSD. Although at the request of the superintendent, he has asked that we remove the item from consideration at this meeting and at the city council meeting on Monday so that the school district can consider the grant and its related components. We've received a number of public comments in regard to this matter. The city clerk's office has responded to people sending those comments in that the matter will not be considered today, nor will it be considered by the council on Monday. We will hold on to those comments when and if the item does come forward. So for now, any action on this would be pending action by the school district. That leaves us with a rather short agenda for the day, but given recent issues in our community, we thought it was important, and I know that the committee feels it was important to receive the update from the police chief, which is the subject of item 2.
So item 1 will be considered by the school board, and depending on that action, as the city manager says, it'll come back to us at a later date. With that, let's go back. I'm sorry, Mr. Hampton, did you?
Yeah, I just really briefly, for Monday's meeting at the council, I sent you an email about, the recent events, what has happened in Atlanta. It seems like we have had in America more hate crimes, or potentially this looks like a hate crime to me. And I just want to make sure that our residents know that we don't condone any of this, and that we should be standing strong with all of our communities in the city of Pasadena, our Asian community, our Black community, our Latino community, our Armenian community, and we should condone any hate crimes in our city and let people know that they will be prosecuted at the fullest extent that we possibly could. So I was just wondering if there was a way to put that on the agenda for the city council or a resolution for Monday's meeting.
I did see your email, and I connected with the city clerk. We're looking for the appropriate way to handle it, resolution, declaration. But we'll connect with you either tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon, how we proceed with that.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, may I have a couple seconds on that one, please?
Sure.
I know it's not on the agenda, but I also received a text from someone who is rightly alarmed that 8 people were killed by this individual. 6 are Asian women. And the population in Pasadena, the Asian community is approximately 16% or 22,000 residents. And this particular individual, who is an elected official, is hoping either that we can pass some kind of joint resolution, possibly with TCC, PUSD, and the city of Pasadena to stand strong against such hate. Now, some might say to you or to me, why didn't you have such a response when African Americans or Latinos or whatever other ethnic group? The reality is that this council, and on a personal level, we've had a strong response. And I think Council Member Hampton hit it on the head, and that is that we wouldn't tolerate this kind of action behavior from anyone against any ethnic group. And I think it's incumbent upon us to take a stance, and I look forward to the appropriate leadership on this issue from you, Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity.
We'll have something at Monday's council meeting, and I too received the text from Ms. Chen Lau at PCC, and we'll reach out to her as well. Mr. Madison, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the concerns about those episodes and the backdrop of COVID. Also, there's been a great deal of anti-Asian animus and obviously odious discrimination. So my only concern would be, I'm not sure we should wait for other organizations to do it jointly or in tandem. If that happens organically, great, but I think we should agendize some sort of resolution condemning that, obviously the episode in Atlanta and any similar conduct or feelings.
Well, as I said, I communicated with the city clerk this afternoon, and we'll have something prepared for the council to consider. And maybe to Mr. Madison's point, the council considered it on Monday, and we can ask others to also adopt the same resolution or declaration. Great. Okay. Thank you. So let's go back to the approval of minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Mayor, I think I'm allowed to vote on minutes when I wasn't present, but I noticed that one of the sets of minutes, I was not present for that meeting. Can you or staff advise me? I believe I'm still able to vote. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Roll call.
Motion was by Councilmember Hampton and seconded by Councilmember Madison, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And the motion to approve the 12 sets of minutes. Councilmember Hampton,
Yes.
Councilmember Kennedy,
Yes.
Councilmember Madison,
Yes.
Chair Gordo.
Yes.
The minutes are approved. Thank you.
Okay, item 1, again, for the public who's joining late, item 1 has been deferred pending action of the school board and the school district. So we'll move on to item 2. As we all know, we've seen an increase in violent crime in the city of Pasadena, but it's not just Pasadena, it's in the region. You know, I know we've all been in touch with the police chief and the city manager as members of the council, and expressed our concern. But you know, we've all agreed it's important for the public to hear some of the information directly from the police chief. So we've agendized this matter so that our police department and the city manager can provide information as it's made available. But, we should all understand, of course, that there are active investigations that are ongoing. And I do say investigations because there are a number of incidents. And so we may sometimes be a little frustrated because we're not receiving all of the information that we'd like to have as members of the public. But so I'm going to ask that the public be patient, that, it's not that the police department or the city manager don't want, or members of the council don't want to share information. But oftentimes these investigations are sensitive, and release of information could compromise an investigation. So I think it's important to let the police department do its provide information that it can at this moment, and then come back to us when more progress is made and more information can be released. With that, I'll turn it over to the city manager to introduce the item.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate your comments. Right on point. I've asked Chief of Police John Perez to come today and update the committee and the community on what's going on in regard to recent episodes of violence in our community. As you rightly told, the chief will share what he is able to share. There are several active investigations currently underway, so we beg the patience of the public that the chief will only be able to disclose information that won't compromise those investigations. But it's important for people to understand that the Pasadena Police Department and other city resources are working hard in this regard. And so it's appropriate to provide this update. With that, let me turn to Chief John Perez.
Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Committee. As I begin, there's two parts of what I'm going to talk about, but I want to begin by remembering those who have been lost to the gang violence and those who have been greatly impacted, who've been injured. So we can't lose that as the focus for us to bring justice to them in the ways that we can. It is frustrating that investigations don't go as fast as we want, or I can't share everything with you. But before I get into the gang violence, I do want to talk about overall crime briefly so we have an understanding of what's happening. We are looking at historically low crime that we haven't seen in decades. So on one end, that's a good place to be. Every one of our crime categories show a double-digit decrease, except for stolen vehicles and assault with deadly weapons, obviously related to the violence that we're seeing with weapons. So that's a concern for all of us, as it should be. And cities that are struggling with historical gang problems, socioeconomic issues, problems in the school systems, education, and some of these challenges are looking at much larger increases in violent crime than other cities. Cities comparable to Pasadena as well, they run both gamuts. So we are struggling with that as we deal with these issues. As I've talked about before, once we begin enforcement, it's already a failure point. We've already failed in prevention, intervention, not just from police, but everything from schools to families to community services, because people committing these crimes are likely already well into either being career criminals, gang activity, or other type of activity that's negative for a community. So we're dealt with that. So it's important to talk about the fact that our overall crime continues to be low, and again, historically low. But the increase across the country over the past year, it tripled by 35%, and that's the largest increase in our nation's history since we've been keeping statistics likely. And the biggest increase has been 12%. And across the country, it's still low crime. However, if this increase continues continues for 2 or 3 more years, the amount of resources needed at that point could be devastating for us. As I saw in the 1980s, as I worked as a young officer here, it was a challenge for all of us. So to date, for the year, we have handled over 20,000 calls for service so far. And we received 20 community complaints on those 20,000 calls for service. So those 20 complaints are investigated by the police department. Of the 20,000 calls for service, we have seized 82 firearms. Last year, we seized 288, and year to date, last year it was at 37 prior to COVID. At this point, we're at 82 guns in less than 90 days. So it worries me that we are significantly higher, almost triple or well more than double the amount from last year's year to date. And that should be a concern for all of us. And we have hundreds and hundreds of de-escalated efforts by officers since last July that we're tracking. So I cannot begin to tell you the amount of respect and admiration for the type of work they are doing. I worry that there will be an incident in which we are going to be judged by police action. And it's kind of hard to avoid that with this many guns out in the street unless we stop trying to pursue the weapons. And so over 20% of these weapons we've seized are in fact ghost guns. That's a challenge for us because that means people are accessing these and buying these on the cheap. And it's a concern for all of us that we have this issue that will continue for a while. And so we're trying to figure out how to get at these same issues. We do have, when it comes to calls for service, we do have a reduction in the amount of total calls we had compared to last year. Part of this is the reorganization in that we are using our neighborhood services section and getting that bulk calls for service, problem locations, chronic problems, and trying to reduce some areas that have up to 1,000 calls for service. And we're trying to reduce those bundle of calls by the work being done by the neighborhood services section, as well as our service area policing, and it's beginning to work. So I know our reorganization is in fact working, and I'll get into the gang aspect of that as I review the violence. Today, as I said, we have 6 use of forces. 3 have been strikes, as 3 were taser deployments, and the amount of force used based on the total amount of arrests is at 0.79% of all arrests. And we are down by 30% of arrests this year as compared to last year at this time. And please remember, some people have indicated, well, that's COVID numbers. Well, at this time last year, we were just getting into COVID. So we had January, February, and March. So we're already seeing a decrease in the amount of arrests that we have. What does concern me going forward is as the economy does pick up and we see more tempo of the city. Obviously, you all know that the population of the city doubles during the day at full speed. 1 million cars come through the city, more opportunity for crimes. We just become a big hustle and bustle destination city that we have to try to manage all that goes on. So those are the stats overall. One I didn't get into was the homicide stats. Last year we had 7 homicides. This year so far we have 2. And so one of them was a body dump, as it's called, over in the Arroyo Seco. A person was shot and then burned and tossed there, probably from outside the city that came through the city. The second one was the individual this past Friday. As we all know, we had the shooting as a person was sitting inside his car. And that was, in fact, a concern to all of us and what's happening, because some of the violence now has pushed on to the east side of the city at Victory Park. We had some shots fired in Asbury, and we've had this shooting now over at the a taco location or a Mexican food restaurant out there. So it is a concern. And from this point, what I'll get into is the actual violence, so we can get into questions that might come up. And as I said, we had a homicide on January 1st, and we had the second on March 13th as well. So these are problems for us and challenge. All these investigations are ongoing. There is progress in these investigations. Not enough for me to talk about here today. We have to continue that our homicide and robbery unit are working diligently and around the clock, and they are producing. It just takes some time to ensure that we do this right, correctly by the law to bring justice to these families. So with the amount of gun violence, we believe a large majority is gang involved to some level. Gang conflict is hard to identify at times, but gang involved, we have either one side or another that might have some association to gang activity. We also have reason to believe that we're concerned about Latinos around Villa Park that have been targeted by race. And we have 3 victims who died, including a 10-year-old who's been shot. And that's a concern for all of it. And a couple of these incidents involved an assault rifle. So we need more investigations to investigate this, to look at it. It's too early to talk too much about that, but it is obviously a concern as we look across the country what's happening in Atlanta. Locally, the chiefs, we are talking about holding a local forum on these type of events, and so we're looking to see where it might be held and how many cities would be involved. So all of this is a concern and a challenge for all of us and what we're looking at. Our new model of policing has helped to stop some of the violence. It's been underway. We're using science and using hotspot policing. We are focused on a couple of neighborhoods by calls for service, career criminals, and people we know to be gang members. That is our focus. And when people across, this region criticize the police department for eliminating a gang model, an antiquated gang model, it's much like we did in creating the neighborhood services section. We need new models. We need brand new models to go after better achievement and success into the future. This was the same with the school police and getting rid of the school police we had back in 2018. We needed a new model to go forward. All these 20, 30-year models need science. They need a different approach to have better solutions for everybody. So at some point, we have to stop the distrust of the police and start new and find a place to rebuild the trust and the confidence. And it's going to take a lot of faith for all of us to do this. So with that in mind, I also want to talk about our deployments, that we are deploying specific units every night into the neighborhoods that need policing. That's the way we're getting many of these guns. And so we are stopping some of the violence. We are deterring some of it by being visible. You could never have a measurement on deterrence. It's very hard to do. And so we know some of this is occurring just by the information we are receiving back. We are conducting prevention and intervention. Our prevention methods, if you haven't seen it, is officers walking through the neighborhoods. I've seen the officers out in certain blocks. I've been out there myself. Mayor, you've been out there as well, and I appreciate that the neighbors want to talk to the police and really get into what needs to be done in these neighborhoods. They don't show up. They don't submit public comment. They don't belong to organizations. They're not part of nonprofits. These are people trying to survive in their neighborhoods that have a couple of jobs. I know one father who stays up all night because his daughter comes home from work, and the other one goes to work at 3, 4 in the morning, and he stays up with them to make sure they're going to be safe. These are things that drive me in our approach to policing, to make sure we are doing enough prevention, the intervention, and again, we're left with the enforcement in these positions. The intervention part of what we're doing, we may not be in the schools, but we are in fact with our youth advisors connecting with our school population, our youth, through tutoring every day and have a connection with them to keep them busy and make sure they are being active. I know there are some groups that would like us to eliminate the youth advisors and eliminate our connection with youth, but we are not going to try to be able to stop some of the work that we're doing into the future. At this point, very little prevention and intervention is going to stop some of this conflict. And the reason for that is that we already have people who are gang members carrying guns, or they haven't got their high school diplomas or have jobs available. It's hard to pull them back. The prevention intervention we do today should help us over the next 2 to 5 years to reduce the same cycle we've seen, or I have seen for 35 years in the city, that we keep looping around to the same issues. So at some point we have to work harder, stronger, better, and we have to really show this community we're working together. So we are conducting the prevention, the intervention, and again, we are conducting carefully the enforcement. The enforcement to me has changed. We're no longer, as I said, throwing that net over a community and pulling in what we can and asking who's a gang member. This is much like doing surgery probably for cancer, where the doctor goes in and just removes the cancerous parts without destroying the rest of the body. And this is difficult for us. And it's difficult to ensure we're doing it right. And with 20,000 incidents, we try to make every one as perfect as we can be. But we do fail, or there are circumstances that really cause us challenges when we're trying to seize weapons.
You touched upon some predictive policing. That may not be the right word, but using technology to help you map out part of your strategy in addressing the uptick in violent crime. Is that proving to be very helpful?
Yes, and predictive policing is not the term. Intelligence-led policing is not using any new system or any type of application or anything else. It's basically looking at the numbers that you have and looking at where they're occurring the most, as well as understanding people that are on parole or probation, that are career criminals, and some of the intelligence we could gather from people involved in some of these crimes to give us what we know. So it's a combination of a lot of different things. And one of the reasons we redesigned and remodeling our approach to reducing violent crime.
And do you have a good handle on the age range or group of the young people who are involved in the violence?
We believe so. It's going to be what I would call youth age. Youth age is anything from juveniles up to 25 years of age. Some are a bit older than that, but not much past 30.
Okay. And as it relates to those that are defined in some dictionary or well accepted prosecutorial lexicon, the career criminals, are you confident that you've got the right resources intervening to engage?
I hope so. It's too early to know. If we see a reduction in the violence as we make arrests, the answer to that question will be yes. If in fact we make arrests and the violence continues upward, it might require old models to return like SES and put them back into play, which is being requested by a majority of people around the city to see that back. But we are deploying as many, if not more, specialized cars to look at what's happening with violence and making sure we're out there. We are only as good as an individual stop, an individual investigation. It's like anything else you do in life. It's the skill sets applied to a given situation we're responding to or we believe is happening.
Chief, it has always been my understanding that it's truly a rarity for one ethnic group to target another ethnic group. And historically, I believe in Pasadena, we have not seen a lot of that. What has changed?
We don't know at this point, or anything, nothing that I would share for this forum. However, we saw this back about 10 to 12 years ago. We saw something similar where Latinos were targeted as victims with street robberies and other type of events requiring a lot of intervention and arrest that occurred. So these events, this time around, we think it's returned again. We have a lot more work to understand it, but in understanding it, the more important part is to stop it and arrest people responsible for it.
And if you have the resources to add 100 new officers to the police department, and we certainly do not, but if you did, would that in and of itself eliminate, not ameliorate, eliminate the problem?
It would definitely reduce it greatly because you could place officers on street corners back in the early 90s under a principal by who's passed now, Chief Bruce Philpott. We used a principle or a initiative where we parked our cars on street corners and we stayed there for as long as 8 hours a shift in trying to deter crime. It's a very difficult type of approach. It didn't last very long back in the we're probably doing it in 90, 91. And so it was very difficult to keep that maintained. So with 100 police officers, we would definitely create new elements of investigations, financial crimes, the dark side of the economy is happening. I could give you many examples, even in Pasadena, a second style of, or a second lifestyle for many people that are operating under the legal economy based on what's happened after the last recession and what's happening in this recession, for money laundering to bad practices that are never good for any community.
Then my last question is no less troubling than any other question that I've asked you to address this evening, but you brought it up, and that was assault rifles. Did you suggest earlier in your presentation, Chief, that there are lawbreakers using assault rifles?
So we've had a few over the last year, shots fired where we're comfortable to say that it was assault rifles. We've had one incident where a 10-year-old was shot with an assault rifle, and that was reported to me from somebody who was, I'd say probably there, that we had an individual at one of our parks off of Fair Oaks pull out a assault rifle and attempted to shoot a number of people in a parking lot, except the rifle didn't go off and everybody ran in different directions. So there is a concern for assault rifles that are out there as well. Again, not all cities are suffering from this, but cities with historical gang and violent conflicts are trying to understand how to stop this. And one of the ways to stop it right now, council member, is by having prevention in the schools, at the middle schools, at the high schools, to let young people know, don't carry the guns. And because again, once all my resources are placed into enforcement, it doesn't leave us much avenues. It also doesn't leave you much avenues when we're unable to share our experiences with young people about why not to participate on gangs, or why not, why they shouldn't carry guns. We're restricted in that type of community conversation. So I worry that we're going to fall into another loop and another decade of this. And I'm very comforted by the drop in crime, our reorganization, what we are doing. And I'm really hoping that the second half of this year is going to produce the outcome that we've been trying to produce for decades and decades. So we're on our way, just need more time and more footing to get this going, along with the great work by the robbery and homicide units.
I would say in closing that if you need any resources that you do not have and you believe they're critical to resolving this matter for the whole community, not the Black community, brown community, yellow community, red community, white community, but for the community town called Pasadena. If this is not the correct forum, I hope that you'll have that conversation with the city manager and would not hold back. And out of respect for the role between the city manager and the police chief, I'll leave it at that. But I am outraged, and my outrage is inadequate. Thank you for the opportunity to share my comments. I appreciate your responses. Chief, thank you, Mayor.
And council member, and so, you know, I apologize if you feel I might be holding back, because I'm trying to be as honest as I can in trying to really confront these issues that we have. And this is the right forum. When it comes to technology, I think that is one of the most difficult parts for us at the policy level to decide how much a police department should use or shouldn't use. So we're always very restricted, more than other cities, in trying to use technology to help us in investigations. I do understand that some of this is about trust and confidence, trust in the police department and confidence in the way we provide services. So I realize my responsibility to be able to gain that confidence and that trust from our community to present the technology we might use to help us. But at the same time, there's a big pushback not to have any type of technology, as we've seen in the past presentation in this council. And this Public Safety Committee has been fantastic in support, not only hold me accountable, asking the right questions, but permitting what they think is the right thing to do and still holding us accountable to the outcomes of these incidents. That's all I want. I want to be able to use the technology that we have, but be held to a high level of criticism and providing the feedback that we need. I'm guided by the city manager on many issues, and he provides that insight I may be lacking in the development, but I think it's also a bigger discussion for us to talk about what we need to really send a message to stop these events by arrest. When we start making arrests for these, we will see the crime drop off. That's been my history. That's what I know. But trying to get there, it's not quick enough for me. It's not fast enough. But yet I know how great our investigators are doing as they move forward. So it's a challenge for all of us.
Thank you.
Mr. Madison.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, it's just very disheartening, this uptick in violence. My sense is that we're not alone in Pasadena. You know, I read about armed robberies at gunpoint, but I don't know that I've heard a lot about gang violence and murder rates in surrounding communities. So, Chief, what is your take, if you will? Are we an outlier in terms of what's happening, or is this part of the sort of overarching condition that we find ourselves these days?
These days, all cities are dealing with chronic problems, nuisance locations, which is the onset of many of our problems, and the ability for us to get at those early issues will help us reduce long-term violence and gang crime. That's the reason we created the neighborhood services section. So other cities around us, we take a city like Glendale that has about 30,000 more people, or 50,000 more people than we do, is not suffering the same crime rates as we are. However, they have their share, and they do have to struggle with what they have. There are other cities, if you want to compare us to Pomona, our crime rates are not too far apart at times. Again, ours right now, council member, at our historical lows, and we see drops in every category, double digit drops. The challenge is getting at the violence right now, and it's happening because cities that have historical socioeconomic issues, when it's related to jobs and the economy, proper housing, all these type of issues, family structure, services in the community, a strong school district, all this becomes an equation that gets us where we need to be, of healthier lifestyles and better decisions by young people. And that's our challenge. So the more intervention, prevention we do today will save us in the years to come. But it's very difficult, even for us, to start this as we get pushed back. And I do understand it. I do understand the complete issues that we are challenged with when it comes to gaining that trust and that confidence. So, council members, those are the issues. If you could create 30,000 jobs locally tomorrow, improve our school district, lower the price of renting an apartment, I would tell you, and it's not so dense in some areas like it is around Villa Park, I would tell you that you see a great drop in crime. If we're already dropping rates close to where Glendale is at and other safer cities, you could imagine that we'd be one of the safest cities in the state.
Well, and I think we aim to do all of those things, and I think we have a presidential administration that aims to help working families and the economically disadvantaged, and doesn't take the view that if you have a criminal record, you're a loser and that you should be written off in perpetuity. So I think we're trying to right the ship. I mean, I will share with you, it's very disheartening for me to see these reports. We get the noteworthies, and perhaps there is tremendous community energy around this, but I'm not hearing it. I'm not seeing it. And I think we need to harness the energy of the entire community around this. And when you have a 10-year-old shot with an assault rifle, that should be enough to jar us out of our complacency. And of course, at the same time, and I want to be measured, and this council did absolutely the right thing in establishing a police oversight commission and an independent auditor. Those are issues that I get 100 people in my driveway demonstrating about, or 500 emails and texts. A 10-year-old shot with an assault weapon that soldiers are afraid to use in battle, and it's on our neighborhood streets. I haven't gotten a single text or email. Haven't heard from a single member of the community about that. So how can we leverage the entire community, the entire energy of our city around these issues? Because I totally agree with you. We've got to get to these kids. My understanding is that 10-year-old was a completely unwitting, victim. By the way, did he pass away, or did he hang on?
The 10-year-old, some of our officers, Lieutenant Aguilar and his team, went to go visit him today to drop off some things. The mayor's been gracious enough to help gather some Lakers. He's a big Laker fan, And so they have a GoFundMe page, and he's in there, he's pushing, and these points are frustrating for us as police officers. You want to be everywhere, you want to stop everything, and the officers were, less than 2 minutes away. They were there on scene very quickly. They stopped the bleeding, and that young man just kept telling the officers thank you for what he was doing, for what the officers were doing. So these are difficult times for us around this nation with the outcome of COVID. And what I mean by that is the cabin fever approach of how young people are reacting to the economy and all the different things that are happening in their lives, especially if they're about 30 years old. This is their second recession of no jobs, no opportunities. So we got some very large national issues that will help us at the local level. But until we start coming together, I know as a police chief, the reform that we've done and the things that we are doing are more than most police chiefs across this country. And we got 18,000 police departments and 12,000 municipal police departments. I know at what we're putting into play with the 30-day review, the use of force, using technology, all these things to reduce it with implicit bias, trying to get there. But we are measured by one singular issue. The fact I have 20,000 incidents and we show positive outcomes with hundreds of de-escalations, with almost 100 guns seized. Every night I go to sleep, I don't usually sleep well because you have officers out there doing what they do. When you get called about the gun recovery or you read about it like you do in the morning, you just think in your mind about what that's like. I've had to wrestle with people with handguns on their waistbands before, so I understand the decision making that goes through their minds, and so I realize that we are really challenged on trying to have outcomes. What's great about this city is the fact that all these issues, we are willing to put them on the table and talk about them. We do so much prevention, so much intervention at times that has been positive for the outcomes and seeing great results for many of our nonprofits that do this work. It's incredible when you look at the Flint Ridge Center and you look at the reintegration or some of the work being done by many, many others. It helps. It really has made us a better city. We have to coordinate this, to your point, somehow into a larger community discussion to talk about prevention, intervention, and creating a long-term plan that's going to work for us. In the meantime, we are stuck again right now with enforcement, and that makes us all uncomfortable. And I know at the next incident that happens that might not go as planned, I'll be held responsible for that outcome. And I realize that potential, and that's why we prepare for all the anomalies that might occur, but it's just not easy.
Well, I tell people all the time, I read these noteworthies about, you've got certainly my support, and I think I speak for my colleagues.
I appreciate that. And over the last 6 months, we are developing a wellness program, and we do have a system that's different than ever before, and much of it thanks to the city manager and our HR director, Jennifer Curtis. We've created something different with the fire department. We do have a peer support team. We are doing some really positive stuff in regards to wellness and ensuring that we keep focus on those issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, I've been right there, Mr. Madison, as you know, asking the chief if he has the resources that are needed. And Chief, this is distressing news that we've received over and over. It's not just, this isn't a one-off. This has been occurring since what, last year is when we started to see the trend.
Well, for me, it's been ongoing since the 80s. We've had
no, I understand, but
I mean,
I'm talking about the specific trend that we're seeing now. In the spike. You've said yourself, a 20% increase in violent crime, is what I'm referring to.
Yep. So I mean, it moves in loops and cycles for me over the decades, and this is the current one we're dealing with. We've had times when we've had 20, 30 more officers in the department at higher levels, and the crime rate and the violent rate was much, much higher than we see today. But what we're challenged with right now is having enough recruitment, having enough officers come in, making sure we're hiring for the positions that we have. As I told you before, I'll take responsibility for offering me more police officers and saying that it was too early to have them last year because the reorganization had to happen. It was more important to do that than to fall deeper in the hole. At the time, we had close to 30 vacancies. Today, we have single number vacancies, and I want the officers to feel supported with what we have and build it carefully upward to ensure what's happening, especially after the recession that we've dealt with and we haven't recovered from with COVID, and the budget being a concern. I know there's a group of people really want to get more involved in the community with developing a new budget to present to council either this year or next year on what the police budget could look like. So that's going to be a dynamic, let alone adding more people. So we'll see how that turns out as we go into that debate with that issue.
So the issue that I'm concerned about is, you know, what I continue to be concerned about is the parks. You know, when we last talked about resources and the fact that we just didn't have enough park safety specialists, maybe didn't have enough police officers. I remember people coming into the chambers and saying, you know, that we had too many police officers. I rejected it then. And to this day, I remember Dale Gronemeyer coming in and who didn't live in Pasadena, lived in Sierra Madre, now doesn't even live in the state of California, telling us the same thing. And you know, I think we need to separate the issue of responsible policing that engenders trust, that treats people fairly with sufficient police to keep our community safe. And you know, I'm looking to you, Chief, when you reorganize the department. You know, that's your call, and I said it to you then. You know, this is your call. We can't tell you what to do, but you know, it's got to work.
It is working, Mayor. I mean, we saw in 2015 to 2017, we saw higher rates of violence and crime, and we lost 20% of our workforce because the officers didn't feel supported by the city. 20% left us because they just didn't feel that they had the support. We look in 2020, 2021, we have a number, dozens and dozens of lateral officers from other departments wanting to come here. We have hundreds of applicants. And so what we wanted to repair first, we've repaired, and it's working. And now it's a matter of just really going after this violent crime and arresting those responsible for it. So even then, when you wanted more officers, the problem was bigger than that. It was deeper than that. And to this day,
I don't disagree with you. I mean, there's social equity issues, there's issues with, and we need to continue to focus on that, giving kids an opportunity and an alternative to being involved in the first instance. But we also have to have the appropriate staffing to ensure that we can stop the violence when it escalates.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm looking to you for. You know, and you know, I'm still receiving the calls related to park safety specialists and the need for park safety specialists to lock up our parks, as an example. And, I'm not seeing and park safety specialists are civilian, more like park rangers, if you will, than police officers, or as opposed to police officers who are armed. But the park safety specialists serve an important role. And, I continue to believe that we need park safety specialists who can engage the community in a positive way at the parks, who can provide guidance at our parks, but also help with the security at our parks by locking up parks, being a presence there. When we start the budget discussions, I'm going to ask again about that because, I'm not convinced that we're providing the service that we should be as it relates to the safety in our parks. And I think park safety specialist is one way to do that, to secure our parks.
That's a fair discussion to have.
Yeah, and, Mr. Madison and I have both harped about that and other issues for years. Safety and security of our residents in parks and libraries and neighborhoods is our number one responsibility.
I remember even during that discussion, as I remember them, we still lost 20% of our workforce. They still left us. So having 20 more officers and going from 20 vacancies to 40 doesn't erase the problem. So even during that discussion, officers were still leaving us. So I wonder if our energy was spent in the wrong place. So as we're talking about if we're talking about more officers and more personnel, yet people are still leaving us.
They were leaving us for other reasons because people were attacking them, and it affected morale. So you know that, and I know that. Not because we were talking about additional resources for the police department.
That's a fair
So
discussion.
I think we've got to separate the issues of responsible policing, again, policing and police officers that are trained, that are fair, that do their job in a way that everyone can be proud of, and they can be proud of. But the issue of resources needs to be separated. And again, when we have these budget discussions, we should raise. I'm going to raise that question, and I know others will as well.
Any increases, if you guys think it's appropriate, of course, we could have that. That's for the city manager to discuss as well in an open setting. But again, I don't want to sacrifice more personnel and going into recruitment and then falling in the same holes we did before by really having dozens and dozens of vacancies as opposed to single digits. So this becomes more vehicles, the equity, all those things. In my journey over this lifetime, I have seen us miss it at times, and every 10 to 15 years we lose 15 to 20% of our personnel. I just want us for once to do it right, to reorg, remodel, have the right equipment, and if the discussion is about more personnel, more resources, it's a fair discussion to have at that point. But everything else has usually been absent in those discussions, and we just seem to be too focused in one area as opposed to another.
Well, and then the other issue is it troubles me to hear that people would say, let's undo the Explorer program. I mean,
Youth
the
advisors.
Explorer program, youth advisors. I'm not sure. I'd not heard that one.
Yeah, they're in
But,
the
you know, that,
schools, they're in the schools.
no,
working on it.
I know who the youth advisors are, but I'm not sure why people would want to be rid of the youth advisors. I mean, the youth advisors have been around for how many years now? Decades.
Since, yeah, absolutely, 30 years.
Yeah, and, you know, we've seen people graduate from those programs and go on to terrific careers, get a better understanding of our police department, contribute in different ways, not just policing. And so I think that's silly to say get rid of a program that's been successful.
I agree.
And so, you know, I think we have to take stock in what's happening here. We have to look at resources for activities for kids, including ensuring that our kids can participate in programs after school, that they have, you know, that our fee schedule isn't pricing kids out of our own programs after school. And I intend to raise that issue as well. So it's you know, it's a complex issue, and we need to address it as such.
And I'm completely open to the discussion. I mean, we have 5 defunded positions just sitting there. So before you even get into hiring more officers, you have defunded positions that haven't moved. And if there's a discussion of more park safety personnel, that's a fair discussion to look at what's needed. As long as we don't sacrifice more personnel, they've had a issue with equity in the past. So it's just, you're trying to balance those 2 issues.
But believe me, I recall the only reason they're even in the budget as defunded is because I didn't want to see them leave the budget. And so
Thank you for that.
I didn't support defunding them or getting rid of them. So you know, again, Mr. City Manager, I'll look to you and say, you know, ultimately, you're the person that's responsible, and, you know, having a budget discussion where we look at opportunities for kids to have alternative activities at our parks, particularly in the summer when they're not in school, having an opportunity to engage in affordable programs at the park, but also ensuring that we have appropriate staffing, including the park safety specialist or any other, you know, the NAT team, the neighborhood action team that has been very effective at engaging residents and providing safety in our parks. Those are recommendations that you and the chief have to look at, and your other department heads. But those are the issues that are going to be important to me, and I suspect to others in the community.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And to your point, because you've mentioned it before, as we're developing the recommended operating budget for next year and the fee schedule, we're going to be bringing forward some proposals to reduce the cost of participation for youth, because we need people active in our parks. A lot of the crime and violence that the chief spoke about today has been in and around our parks, and we need to displace antisocial activities with pro-family, pro-children, youth type of activities. So you'll be seeing that proposal come forward. You know, to some extent, and as the chief points out, the violence in our community appears to be cyclical. I pulled up an article from 2007 while we're sitting here that talked about Pasadena's gang violence. Certainly making sure that our police department is fully staffed, properly staffed, and importantly has the right equipment to respond. And as the chief says, the right technology to solve these crimes is vitally important. It's not just a number of how many FTEs. Do we have the right equipment to do the work? there are unfortunately some people in the community who, I suppose, because they just don't trust the police, would not want the police to have the technology that's frankly available to virtually every other person to solve crimes. And so we'll be talking at future meetings with this committee about investments in technology that can help the police department keep our community safer. And so I look forward to those discussions. Ultimately, it's the city council that decides the allocation of our limited financial resources, but we will always present to you a balanced budget that we think is responsible in responding to the many needs of our community, of which public safety is the premier goal.
And as we look at, Mr. City Manager, as we look at the opportunities for kids to participate in these programs and the costs associated, we should also look at the facilities and how we utilize those. I mean, I'm, you know, I've harped about it, and I think both to our department, but also to the school district. We rent out facilities to club teams and other, you know, leagues that can afford to pay a higher price at the expense of not having a space available for our own kids and who live in and around our own parks to participate. And then we say, well, the fields are booked. And so I'm not going to predetermine that we're still engaging in that practice. I will tell you that I drive all of our parks at least once a week. At least once a week. And you know, I see that activity, but I would like, as we come forward, to report on, as we come forward during the budget, how we're using our facilities. I mean, you know, and whether we're making them available first to residents of Pasadena and to teams that are located here, and ensuring that they can participate in those activities. So not just the parks, but the community centers as well.
And Mr. Mayor, I mean, that's probably more for Parks and Recs, but we are supporting them with our volunteers, our park safety specialists. We did create a NAT team, which would have been probably a multi-million-dollar request to recreate the NAT team in 2019, and we did that on our own to demonstrate that this was needed. So there are things we could do. We have to be a smart government. We have to watch the pennies. We have to make sure that if I need more, I need to ask for more. But with my number one priority for my department is community safety, stopping the violence, and ensuring that we have the police department, you know, technology, the infrastructure on the inside, making sure our cars work, making sure we have all those things so they could do a better job in creating elements like the NAT team without asking for more money. So I know the time will come to have that discussion, but either Mr. Kennedy's Zoom is frozen or his arm's getting very tired.
No, we'll turn to him next. But you get the challenge, Mr. Mermel, is, you know, that balance that I think all of us are looking for. Opportunities for kids, fair, responsible policing, but also a well-staffed department that has the resources it needs in circumstances like this. Because you know, it's unacceptable for people to be shot in their neighborhood, in front of a restaurant, and certainly for a 10-year-old who's now 11, by the way. I visited him a week or two ago in the hospital outside of the city, and on his 11th birthday, and he's recuperating. But the fact that he's had to experience this and others have lost their life to violence in our city is unacceptable. Mr. Kennedy?
First of all, I'd like to thank the mayor for his leadership leadership around this issue and the fact that he stepped up and has chosen to chair the Public Safety Committee. I think that's critically important that our head of our government has made that choice. It's an important choice. I want to be clear to the city manager and to the police chief that I will continue to ask critical questions of the police department, but I want to be crystal clear that I am 101% behind our police chief. I think he's done a phenomenal job, the way in which he conducted himself, and by virtue of his conduct, his department followed during all of the unrest that took place in 2020, particularly after the heinous death of George Floyd.
Yeah.
Was really first-in-class leadership more than policing response. It was called leadership. And you know, he doesn't brag about it, and certainly we don't brag about it, but he's one of the few PhDs who actually use the PhD to do something that's meaningful in terms of making sure best-in-class policing takes place in Pasadena. That's not a city council requirement. That is a community requirement. And you are to be applauded for that, Police Chief John Perez. And I suspect, given the fact that, let me just say that the city manager made that decision. And from my advantage point, it was one of the best decisions the city manager could have made. Now, having said those laudatory comments, which come from my heart, in no way will I abdicate my responsibility if we don't get it right. But I am supportive of.
Appreciate your update. I you know, before I go into some of my comments, I did mention, you know, we talked kind of about the 20% of the officers that left because of, I guess the mayor characterized it as people being critical. I think personally that being a police officer is a highly critical job. So whether it's criticism from the city council or criticism from people on the streets, I think that's part of the job. If you get into that line of work, just like we got in this line of work, and people are going to be very critical of us. I do also think that a lot of people that left the Pasadena Police Department left because there wasn't a lot of upward mobility opportunities there for them. There was, I mean, people that are in leadership now, no offense, Chief, I have a lot of respect for you, your position. You've been with the city for over, what, you going on 28 years, 30 years now?
36 years in
No, see,
July.
you'll see, you just answer my question. Look, I was trying to make it a little fun. But I mean, you think about it. It's like being it's like being you know, in the Tournament of Roses and trying to be the president. I mean, you're going to go somewhere where you can become the president quicker. And if we have people that have so much love for this organization that are in the way of upward mobility, then younger officers are going to leave. Because when I think about time frames, it's like, I'm not thinking about staying here for 35 years, 40 years. I want to be the chief today, you know? So, and I respect all of your work and the time that you put into it, but I think that also plays into it. You know, that's a big piece of it. Also, you know, I commend all of our officers for getting guns off the street, but I mean, really at the end of the day, that's like, you know, sweeping leaves every day. I mean, it's a federal, I mean, it is a federal law for anyone to have a gun. I mean, we can't change that. There's not going to be anything we're ever going to be able to change. There's always going to be someone riding around with a gun. It's just a fact. I mean, it's a First Amendment right. I mean, when you pull people off the street with guns, unless they are felons or on parole, what typically happens, Chief?
Very little today. If they have other type of charges, they'll be filed. There are some challenges in the county currently with the new DA's policies. There are some agencies around the area that have arrested people for assault rifles only to release them the same night. For us, you could be out the same night for possession of a handgun. It is a misdemeanor crime. Very difficult to get filings on many of these cases as well. So we are challenged as well. It's much like the drug addiction problem that we're seeing in society. The majority of our homeless people are addicted to some sort of street drug, as are many of the people that are in possession of a handgun or involved in gangs. I am not saying that we need to incarcerate everybody, but when almost all people we've ever arrested are drunk or on drugs, and there's no arrestable offense or nowhere to take them, we are just making a problem even worse. So people under the influence of drugs, if we stop them, we let them go, and they're going to go off to do whatever they're going to do before, and God forbid if they have a handgun as well. So we are challenged in today's society. It's gotten worse during COVID with the new rules and the new laws, hampered by the cabin fever issue, and again with the violence that's occurred. All these things have created a perfect storm. There is no one reason that causes crime to go up and no one reason that causes crime to go down, much like the economy. It takes many different variables to make that happen. So we are challenged on more fronts than police officers. They're training, the equipment, as well as the laws that we have. And see, these things are coming at us at a very, very fast rate at this time.
Well, thanks, Chief. How many officers did we have? Because I always hear the conversation about in the 80s and the 90s and in early 2000s, how many more officers we had on the streets.
So in the 1980s, we had about, I would say, 200, and then we went into the Villa Park project with a federal grant with the Lincoln Triangle. We got 20 off of a grant back then that brought us up to 220. Over the years thereafter, we raised that number up at high point of 252 with about 10 overhires that we were capable of hiring up to 262. And those crime rates, again, were much higher than we have today. But today we have 239 of you include the 5 defunded positions. Without it, it's 234. And we are looking at about 8 to 10 vacancies, which is also a very low number over the years as well. So for me, it's trying to increase the vacancy rate. So something around 5 to 8 is pretty standard for us. And then seeing if we could look at whatever the city might need in terms of more public safety.
Okay, I only asked that question because I don't know if necessarily always throwing more bodies at a situation is going to make it any better. Because I mean, if I think about what the crime rate was when we had more police officers on the street, based on the graphs that I was sent when I was first elected, it seemed like crime was happening in the same areas at a higher rate than it is today. So I you know, you're the expert when it comes to these things, and I expect you to give us the expert opinion. But based on just the data and the way it looks, but none of this stuff is, you can't data drive the way people are thinking, right? I mean, it's going to be really hard. Well, I guess you can. I guess Target has figured it out. They always try to send me advertisement. But
and I realize that, council member, because I may be one of the only chiefs anywhere that rejected, getting more police officers. And so I understand the predicament I placed myself in. I'm probably the only chief that, eliminated the gang unit. So again, I place myself in foolish positions, but I do it based on a lot of thought and serious discussions with everybody internally, externally, other agencies, and doing my studies properly, as well as using my experiences and lessons. So this is not an easy place to be. It would be very, very
Well,
easy for me.
Chief,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
That's okay.
I don't think that you should be as hard on yourself for eliminating a gang unit when we had a gang unit and we still had crimes and shootings were still happening in the same locations. So you actually are trying to do something different than your predecessors, and you are actually. So I am actually giving you I'm applauding that you're thinking outside the box, and you're saying, we can't do policing the way it's been done over and over and over again, right? But one thing I do have to say about the police department, and growing up in Pasadena and being here for 5 generations and hearing stories from those that have also lived here, and when my grandfather, my great, hearing stories about his father and subsequent, and what I've always heard was, there are things about old Pasadena which I like to just kind of bring up. In old Pasadena in the 90s, man, it was not good. I will tell you that right now, it was horrible. Like, I used to go to the United Artists movie theater when you could go to movie theaters. I guess you can go to them now again. And my parents used to say, you stay inside the movie theater until we pull up, and then you come out, right? And old Pasadena, as a neighborhood, got together and said, business owners got together and said, we are going to make some changes here. They implemented the guys that are out there in the yellow shirts that they call guides, that kind of work like security guards, right? They also use our taxpaying dollars, people parking down on the streets, to hire more police officers just to be down in Old Town Pasadena. I mean, so there's officers in Old Pasadena, right? So the reason I bring this up is because, as the mayor has mentioned, it is so important that the places that people should feel sacred or feel most comfortable, that live in the city, right, that pay everybody's salary. I'm not saying I'm not, and I know you guys get lots of those emails. I get those emails too that say, "Hey, I'll pay your salary," and I'm like, you short a few checks, but but those people need the same protections that the people in our commerce areas have, because we want people to come into Pasadena, but we also want the people that live in Pasadena to feel like they are in Old Town Pasadena when they go to the park. So I don't think this is more so a discussion of the council, or actually the public safety committee, because throwing more police officers at this may not be our problem. Maybe we're just looking at this completely different. Maybe we need to have park guides out there. The more eyes on a situation, and then maybe those park guides need to be people that live in the community, right? And we're paying them and this is a job, right? But the more eyes that there are on a situation, the more likely it is people are going to come, go to the park, be at the park, which in turn means that there's more people in the parks. I feel like this is like the Twilight Zone, and we have these discussions every year or every 4 or 5 months, and we're like, oh, there's another shooting at Phillip Park. Oh, there's one at Jackie Robinson. Oh, someone was shot at La Pintoresca. Oh, someone was smoking at Washington, and this was that. It's the same story. And so, Chief, at this point, I'm not, I can't place the blame on you because you have heard it over and over and over again. At this point, it is up to us as city council members, right? And to Councilmember Madison's discussion about not getting those text messages, hey, I get those text messages all the time. I get them at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, or the phone calls. I'm getting phone calls on my personal cell phone. Maybe I could pass them your cell phone number if you like me to. That would make sure you get some of that as well. But people are at the point where they're like, there's been a problem at this park for going on 20 years. And it's almost like they feel as if no one cares. So we have to show them as a body, Mayor, that we do care. And it's not necessarily, a policing issue, just as the chief mentioned, it's human services. And maybe we need to get guides in our parks. We have to do something different, as our chief has done with the gang unit. I mean, crime is essentially down. I mean, minus things that people have seen, and you're getting shooting them, but essentially, crime is still relatively low in comparison to where it was at its peak. So, putting more officers on the streets, I don't know if that changes anything, but I do know that, if we put some cameras in the parks, if we put some people in the parks like it is in Old Town Pasadena, then people would treat our parks differently and they would utilize our parks. So, Chief, this is not a question for you. This is just me speaking about what I have seen in Old Pasadena as a kid coming up. And then also recently, what you've done at Hahamunga and Brookside, right? I'm in at Hahamunga and Brookside every other day. And every other day I'm at Hahamunga and Brookside, there are volunteers of the yin yang that you got. I mean, in police officers' uniforms, or their volunteer uniforms, I'm sorry, their white shirts, volunteer uniforms, either on a horse or they're walking the trail. There is visibility. You know what? People come up to me and they say, well, the people that recognize me with the mask on, I guess my eyes are just really recognizable. I don't know. I was like, what? How do you know it was me? But they tell me, thank you. They say, thank you so much for having these. I feel comfortable coming to Hahamunga. I feel comfortable being here because I feel like someone is actually watching. So, Mayor, I sent you something a while back, but and also I think that we have to think outside the box, just like the chief did when it came to the gang unit, because everybody that's on the streets, as the chief has mentioned when he got rid of the gang unit, everybody that's on the street is not a gang member. And that was part of the problem with the gang unit, was that everyone who hung out with a gang or knew a gang member, you came in contact with someone who actually considers themselves a gang member, you become affiliated. And you're not a gang member, but now I'm in the roster of this, I'm potentially a gang member when I'm really not. I just know this guy because we had the same English class at PHS or Muir or Blair or something, right? So, Chief, I think really, Mayor, this is actually a discussion that we need to have as a public safety and say, you know what, we need to actually start thinking outside the box. Shot spotter. I know that we talked about that for fireworks. We actually need to talk about that for actual shots, maybe. We actually need to have these discussions because the people that live in these neighborhoods, whether they live there for 40 years or just moved here 2 years ago, are like, wow, my neighbor told me this was happening like this 40 years ago. I didn't know that this was the neighborhood I was moving into. We need to protect those that have been here for a long time. And those that have been here for a long time, they feel like, man, it's on deaf ears. I mention this all the time to the city. you know, they appreciate you, Mayor. They appreciate me, and they appreciate the council members for having you, you know, speaking what we need. But at this point, we actually just need to say this is what we need to do. So, and I don't have all the answers, but I know that looking at the model of what Old Town is done, Old Town is not what it was in the 90s at all. You know. So anyhow, Chief, I appreciate the update, and during the update, what I noticed, you had mentioned it, and just, you know, about the shooting at the parks, and it. So do we know what the suspects are, or who the suspects are in any of these shootings? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we're looking at all the information, and too early to talk about it.
Okay, because it kind of sounded as if it was black on brown, but from the people I have talked to, it seemed to be brown on brown at Villa. But you know, I'm not saying look, I'm not an investigator, but just the people that I've talked to on the street, like that live in the neighborhood, what they saw, that they witnessed. So, but also, I also want to know about, and I know that you guys are going to cut me off of this because I ask this all the time. Where are we at with the Christopher Blue matter?
Councilmember Hampton, that's not on the agenda. This is Javon Radley.
Oh no, the police chief's update is on the agenda.
I think it's update on violence in the community.
Well, that's violence in the community, right?
Tyrone, I think you can expect to see a closed session discussion.
Okay, that's good. Okay,
that's litigation matters.
That's fair. And then the Christopher Blue matter. Where are we at with that?
Litigation matters will be updated in the near future. All litigation matters.
Okay, I just, you know, I mentioned these because I don't want anybody to think that the city has just thrown that up under the rug and it's all said and done. It's all over, and you know, this is a year later. Actually, Anthony McLean will almost be going on a year, and Christopher Blue will be going on probably two and a half years. You know, and with no answers. So I just think that we owe the community and just people in general a actual answer. So or something to say, hey, we're still mad. The matter's still going on. So I appreciate that, Mayor. Thank you, Chief, for the update, and Mayor, I look forward to having the discussion about, you know, where we're going to move, how we're going to move forward from here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that'll be the budget discussion that I'm making reference to. Mr. Madison.
Mayor, I'm going to have to sign off shortly because I wanted to just mention that Mr. Hampton, I think rightly observed that we do have this culture of guns in our country, and that is something that is to be reckoned with. It's the Second Amendment, actually, not the First Amendment, but
you're right. Right, you're right. I apologize. I wrote that down too.
Quite all right. Right. So, you know,
it's the First Amendment after the First Amendment.
Right. And but I will tell you, I mean, some of our new DA policies are really puzzling, like, and even the law is puzzling, right? My understanding is if you have some nunchucks in your car, that's a felony. But if you have a handgun, a loaded handgun, that's a misdemeanor. And I think that's related somehow to this culture that we have about firearms. But I'm told that the new DA, and I'd ask the city attorney.
No, I was going to say, did you notice that Councilmember Kennedy was drinking the Shamrock Shake?
A green beer?
It's a big mug. It's a big mug, John. So you know, I think during the discussions on the budget, Mr. Hampton, is when we talk about that. You know, in old Pasadena, and you know, I remember when we made the shift in old Pasadena, the guide program that you're talking about was called the host program, and a guy by the name of Chipper Pastron, who owned Rose City Diner in old Pasadena, and I started it, and we started it with youth from our community, together with Chief Jerry Oliver. And we took kids from the Summer Youth Employment and Training program, and they had a 2-week training. They were hosts, and they'd walk around and help people find places in old Pasadena because it wasn't as populated as it is now. And they also had training from the police department on how to spot crime, and they had little radios and would be able to communicate. Chief Perez will remember with a radio. It wasn't a police radio, but it was a radio that they could use to communicate with an officer in the area. That then became the current guide program, but it was originally I think it was 92, John, the host program. John,
yeah. It came out just before the mid-90s when we started to experiment with it.
But we did it with the Summer Youth Employment Training Program, and we put young people to work. And you know, the theory behind the park safety specialist is precisely what you're talking about, Councilmember Hampton, is people in the parks who, you know, they're civilians, they're more like park rangers who can help with guiding people through the parks, who can help with locking up of the parks afterwards, ensuring that, you know, the parks are safe, but they also provide an eyes and ears for our police officers. And so I'll look to the chief. Chief, you've got a tough job, and we all know it. And you know, our job is to ensure that you have the tools and the resources that you need. But as Councilmember Hampton points out, our job is also to look at this comprehensively and ensure that kids and families have the resources that they need. And that's where I look to human services and the city manager, you know, and to tell us how we can increase the number of kids who are participating in programs at the park, kids who live in this community and families. And so that's the commitment that I've made, and I know that all of the members of this committee support that as well. And so we'll look to the city manager to come back with us with
Mayor, with you know, maybe this is just because of staffing or whatnot. From the park safety piece of it, you know, how long have park safety officers been around?
Probably they were originally park rangers, and probably in early, well, it depends how we used to have park rangers.
Mm-hmm.
As is our practice, we would ask that you take that
Mr. Hampton?
Second.
Chair Gordo,
Yes.
and the report is received and filed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone, and be safe. And
Mayor, before we close the meeting, I had an agenda request. In the both of them are related to public health. So I would like to have a request to come back to us about skilled nursing facilities and what we are going to do as the city. These facilities are in our jurisdiction, and you know, we keep on pointing the state our fingers at the county, saying that they need to do it. But I think as a city, these people are residents of the city of Pasadena, and we owe them, you know, the best of our ability. And so I would just like to have that as a discussion.
Councilmember Hampton, we noted that comment from the council meeting
Okay.
the other day. It's listed on our joint meeting agenda with the supervisor. And then we would follow up with a report to this committee. So we didn't lose sight of it.
Okay, cool. You know me, I'm repetitive. So
Say that again.
and then
What was that?
And so the other one was Haha with the sediment removal, and I know that that's going to be one of the items to be talking about with the county. But it would be great to have some information about from at least the data that has been presented over the year of the removal of the sediment from our health department of what the impacts are as far as air quality goes.
Yeah, Councilmember Hampton, that question's been raised before. Our health department's not equipped to provide information about air quality monitoring. That falls to the AQMD. Again, that's on our agenda with the county. It's a county project, and our health department is not actively monitoring it because we're not the regulator there, nor do we have the expertise.
Right. No, I was asking more so a presentation from our health department. You're saying that our health department doesn't have
I'm saying the air quality management district would be the regulator for air quality as it relates to that project. Hopefully, when we have our meeting with the supervisor next week, we can get a little more information, and then perhaps there might be a cogent report we could bring back to this committee. I just wanted to clarify roles.
No, I understand our role. I understand that role is not, this is totally a county project, but the residents that live closest to that project are Pasadena residents, and we have a health department, and we're working with COVID and everything else respiratory at this point, and we're having these discussions. So it would be great.
Rod, I understand the request.
From our health department.
Our department is stretched kind of thin, but I'll pursue and see what we might be able to do.
Well, that was gonna segue into my next question that we need to have a discussion about our health department in general. And, I mean, our health department has done, in my opinion, has done a great job, especially when it comes to the rollout of these vaccines. From the updates that I've received, of course, on Monday I gave some suggestions, and I hope the health department will take those suggestions. But overall, I would say that I believe that our health department is, you know, in this crisis that we have faced. You know, I won't give a grade, but I would say I think that it has been a fair job. And
I would say it's a phenomenal job, sir.
I know you would say that.
it's
I know you would say that, but you know, we can keep on going back and forth on that. But as far as are those people that live in skilled nursing facilities, I'm so sorry.
All right, before we get too far afield,
yeah. So, and I think that's nationally. But these are our experts. So, and these are people's lives. And our health department was telling these people to go back to the same facilities with COVID. So I don't, when it comes to that, no. But everything else, I agree with your statement, Steve. But when it comes to that, that is a non-starter for me.
Mr. Hampton,
But anyhow,
we can agendize for a future date, sir.
Yeah, I think we need to talk about what we're going to do as far as staffing and really properly funding our health department.
I think on the issue of Hahamanga, let me just first say that I think we need to look at that issue carefully, and we'll start with the discussion with the supervisor. You'll recall at last year's meeting, I think it was last year's meeting, where they said, the county said they didn't have air quality testers monitoring sites, and interestingly, the Tuesday after our meeting, all of a sudden they had them out there, and so in the first instance, the jurisdiction for the most part is with the county, but I think we have a responsibility. I agree with you, Mr. Hampton. Twofold. One, to ensure that the county is doing its job, and then two, we also have an environmental section in our health department, and we need to see if we can employ that department, and then thirdly, ensuring that AQMD is doing its job as well. And so we'll talk about that at the meeting with the supervisor. With regard to the health department, I do think that there's some clarification in terms of jurisdiction. I've said it all along. And we'll also kick that discussion off with our discussion with the supervisor, because it involves state, it involves the county, but first and foremost, it involves our own health department. And we'll have to assess it by having the discussion and first being clear on the jurisdictional issue. And so you're on point, and we'll have those discussions kicked off at our, is it March 31st, Mr. City Manager?
The joint meeting?
Yeah, the joint meeting, the 31st, right?
Let me double check. That is correct.
Yeah, and so that's an important meeting for us. So, Mr. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mayor. On the lines of Council Member Hampton's request related to air quality, I'm also concerned about, and the manager knows, sampling of water that comes from behind the dam when we have control releases, as is occurring presently. Maybe not right now, but earlier in the day. And what specifically I want to know in a future meeting is if we're taking samplings of the actual water and retaining those samplings over a time period, and that the samplings are tested. Tested for what? Carcinogenic substances, known and unknown, so long as they're carcinogenic substances, so we can tell our constituency that none were found. But in order to do that, there must be a testing protocol that I'm not familiar with.